Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us for today's presentation by Dr. Bo Xu. He's an associate professor at Jilin University. He's going to speak to us today on China's foreign policy in Northeast Asia, interests and challenges. I'm Bill Reisinger. I'm a member of the board of the ICFRC, and I'll be hosting today's program. Let me begin by acknowledging our members, volunteers, and interns for making these forums possible. In addition, I'm very pleased to acknowledge the University of Iowa's Honors Program, the University of Iowa Public Policy Center, University of Iowa International Programs, and the Stanley U of I Foundation Support Organization for their ongoing support. Did the sound kick out? Oh, still got it. There we go. All right. We're very grateful to today's special sponsors, Joyce Carmen Baldus and Conrad Schultz. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Xu Bo, or Bo as I know him. He's an associate professor in the Northeast Asian Studies College at Jilin University in China. While preparing his doctorate at Jilin University, he received a national grant to conduct research in the U.S., and so he spent calendar year 2012 as a visiting scholar with the University of Iowa Department of Political Science, working under my supervision. And while he was here, he gathered valuable materials for his dissertation, and even more importantly, he became an avid Hawkeye fan, especially but not exclusively of the football team. So after his return to China, he completed his dissertation and joined the faculty at Jilin University. He then received a subsequent competitive national grant and returned to Iowa City as a postdoctoral fellow from 2015 to 17. While here, his son Maxime was born, and now Bo has a companion when they get up early in the morning in China to watch the Hawkeyes play. His current research focuses on Russia's foreign policy in the Asia-Pacific region, the Sino-Russian relationship, and international politics in Northeast Asia. He has authored or co-authored several books published in Chinese and many articles in such academic journals as the Pacific Review, Northeast Asia Forum, and the Journal of Contemporary Asia-Pacific Studies. So please join me in welcoming Bo Xu. I believe so.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Reisinger, for introducing me. And first of all, I would like to say it's just feel great to come back, not just as a researcher, but as a big fan of Hawkeye football team. Although I probably won't have a chance to watch football at Kinnick Stadium this Saturday because I still need to go to the St. Louis to join another conference. But still, I will root for Hawkeye against Illinois this Saturday in St. Louis. It's a great honor, and I'm really glad that I can have a chance to do a presentation here for the Iowa City Foreign Relations Councils, and I'm really grateful for the generous invitation from Professor and Iowa City Internet Relations Council. And my presentation is about China's foreign policy in Northeast Asia, interests and challenges, as you can see on the screen. And as a Chinese IR scholar, what I would like to do today is to provide a Chinese perspective on China's current role in Northeast Asia and international issues in this area. And of course, apparently, there are a lot of different opinions about this issue, about China's role, about international affairs in Northeast Asia, even within China's IR academic circle. And I'm also, of course, really looking forward to your question, and I will try my best to answer them. So there are 5 things that I would like to talk about in my today's presentation. First, I would like to talk about the foreign policy overall as a background for today's talk. And of course, I would like also to talk about what goals of China's foreign policy. And the second part, what I would like to talk about is about why Northeast Asia is so important to China. As we all know that China probably have the most complicated geopolitical situation among all great powers in current international systems. So we have different geopolitical concerns for Beijing and for Chinese government. But why Northeast Asia is so important, that's what I'm going to talk about in the second part of my presentation. And the third part of my presentation and the fourth part of the presentation, I would like to talk about the interests and challenges for current China's foreign policy in Northeast Asia. And at the end, as a conclusion, I would like to conclude my personal expectation and prediction about the future of China's foreign policy in this region. And what I would like to do is also to provide a framework to think about China's foreign policy in the future. So I'll get started with the goal of foreign policy and the goals of China's foreign policy. And as we all know that foreign policy is a series of decisions made by government to deal with external affairs. And of course, in many circumstances, such decisions also contains features of domestic politics. But what are goals of foreign policy? What foreign policy aims to? To this question, my answer is there are two direct goals of foreign policy. One is to protect the interest of one country. Another is to meet challenges, external challenges for the country. So this understanding can give us a perspective to understand why foreign policy is so important and why certain countries conduct certain foreign policy in some international issues. And also, this can also give us a perspective to understand China's foreign policy. So if we want to understand China's foreign policy, we probably should first to understand what is China's interest and what's China's challenges, especially when we talk about China's foreign policy in Northeast Asia. And what are China's goals throughout this foreign policy? And here I provide a framework to understand that, which I call the PPI framework. That is peace, prosperity, and influence. And now I would like to explain it more clearly. So peace, what does peace mean? Peace means that China still does not want to directly get involved with any other external military conflicts or wars. Some scholars use to summarize China's rising power as peaceful rise. I think this understanding still works for current China, that China still keep focus on domestic development instead of getting involved with external chaos. And one exception here probably is Taiwan issue, because Beijing apparently regard Taiwan issue as domestic affairs instead of foreign affairs. So that's probably the only exception that China is willing to get involved with military conflict. Otherwise, I don't think China tends to get involved with any other external chaos. So that's what peace means. And the second term I would like to use is prosperity. So prosperity means domestic economic growth is the central task for Chinese Communist Party. And therefore, an important goal of China's foreign policy is to provide a favorable environment for for its economic development. And probably some of you know that the last year was the 40 years anniversary of reform and opening up policy of Communist Party. And Chinese Communist Party declared that it will continue the policy, the reform and opening up policy, and that means pursuing prosperity is still the most important thing for China's government. And the third term that we can help us to understand China's foreign policy is influence. And influence means that with the rapid growing power throughout the last 30 years, Beijing is seeking for a more important position to have stronger voice on diverse international affairs. And comparing to the previous president of China, Hu Jintao, Xi Jinping believes that a more active role for China on international issues is very helpful for China to continue the domestic development. And that's why Beijing declared its own integration projects like BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And also I will discuss more details about in my later presentation. So next thing I would like to talk why Northeast Asia is so important to China. And this probably is the map that most of you are familiar with. This is the map of East Asia. And Northeast Asia actually is a sub-region of East Asia, which is within the red square that you can see on the map. And we can zoom in a little bit and see more details. And that's the map of Northeast Asia. And for most of Chinese scholars and officials, believe that there are 6 powers in this region. 5 powers are geographically located in the region. That's China, Russia, North Korea, South Korea, and Japan. And another power that is not geographically located in the region, but widely accepted as the regional power, that's the United States. As the United States is a hegemonic power in current international system, so the foreign policy of the United States also has very strong influence on regional affairs, and also because of Japan and South Korea are allies of the United States. So the U.S. foreign policy has influence, and very strong influence actually, in the region. So overall, there are 6 powers in the region, and the reason why the Northeast Asia is so important in China, I list 3 reasons here. First is so-called great power politics. So as you can see that Northeast Asia is a region of great powers. China, Russia, and the United States are great powers in current international affairs. And China and Russia are located in this region geographically, and the United States, as U.S. had a very strong alliance relationship with Japan and South Korea, and also has military existence in the region. So the United States also have strong influence on the regional affairs. So actually, Northeast Asia is one of the regions that receives strong influence from all 3 great powers, from Russia, China, and the United States. And until now, the great power politics is still the foundation of China's foreign policy. So first important reason why NEA is so crucial to the geopolitical consideration of China, of Beijing, is because it's a region of great power politics. And the next reason is because key partnership for China's power, especially for China's economic powers, also located in this region. And here you can see rankings of China's export partnership by countries in 2008. And you can see that the biggest export partnership for China is still with a partnership with the United States. And second place, I'm not sure whether you can see it very clearly, but I will read it for you. And second place is European Union. And the third place is ASEAN. Fourth place is Hong Kong. 5th place, Japan. And then South Korea, and India, Taiwan, and Russia. So, but if we ignore the regional organizations like European Union, ASEAN, and we can also ignore like special area like Taiwan and Hong Kong, which are regarded as part of China, then the first place is still United States. But the second place is taken by Japan. And the third place is taken by South Korea. And the 6th place, and then it's India, and 6th place is taken by Russia. So that means 4 of top 6 export partnership of China are Northeast Asian countries. So that's why this region is so important to China, because China's future economic growth heavily depends on the development of this region. And the third reason why Northeast Asia is important to Beijing is we call it historical memory. And some scholars may call it the shadow of the past. In the modern Chinese history, 2 wars that strongly impact on Chinese modernization process, first and the second, the Sino-Japanese War, happened in this region. And besides, both Koreas, South and North Koreas, and Japan have strong cultural connection with China. So Beijing believes that Northeast Asia is a heartland for China's future development based on historical experience. As in Chinese culture, people pay a lot of attention to the history. So this also has very strong influence on the strategic culture of Chinese government, of Chinese foreign policy. So historical memory is also an important reason why Northeast Asia have special geopolitical value for Beijing. And now I would like to talk about China's foreign policy in Northeast Asia, the interests and challenges. First, I would like to talk about the interest. And of course, there are many interests for Beijing in Northeast Asia, and I only listed three most important interests. And the first and foremost is the relationship with the United States. And for most Chinese scholars and officials, the United States is still regarded as the only hegemonic power of current international system. So Beijing believes that a stable Sino-U.S. relationship is the pillar of China's foreign policy. And in current context of China's foreign policy, Beijing is seeking for a stable, predictable relationship with the United States. And for almost 30 years, also 20 years after 2000, almost 20 years, well, most Chinese scholars and officials believe that the relationship with the United States is very predictable, thanks to economic interdependence and other global issues that are facing by both sides. Although both U.S. scholars and Chinese scholars agree that there are lots of ideological, cultural, political differences between two countries, but there are still some interests that we can cooperate. But apparently, a turning point is when Donald Trump took office, and for Beijing, Donald Trump's management style is very unpredictable. Probably true, and that makes Beijing is more cautious for making deal and implement treaties with the United States. Actually, I think that's one of the reasons why it's so hard for China and the United States to make a deal on the tariff issue, as you all know that. And apparently, there are three other factors that makes China-United States relationship more vulnerable than ever right now. That I would like to talk about. It's about the recent affairs. And the first and foremost is the trade war. As you all know, that's still going on today. And there are no doubt that Trump's tariff policy has harmed the Chinese economy. As I showed earlier that United States is still the biggest export partner for China. But from my point of view, I don't think tariff policy of Trump can harm the Chinese economy as strong as he declared. The most important reason here is because the crucial engine for Chinese economic growth in nowadays is domestic consumption instead of export. So, take an instance for according to the statistics in the first half of 2019 and statistics of 2018, over 60% of Chinese GDP growth is now rooted in domestic consumption instead of export. So there's no doubt that Trump's tariff policy harmed the Chinese economy, and many Chinese companies is facing a very difficult situation. But overall, I don't think such tariff policy can harm the Chinese economy very, very strongly. And even with such strong tariff policy of Trump, Chinese economic growth, GDP growth in this year is probably will still be around 6%, which comparatively is pretty high. And the second issue, in my opinion, probably is more important than current trade war, which I may call it a midterm issue. That is the mutual trust between two countries. So since 2000, the mutual trust between China and the United States is based on the global issues and challenges facing by both sides. Like I said, it's global warming, it's terrorism, and financial crisis since 2008, and of course many other issues. But the mutual trust now is also facing a very strong challenge. A part of the reason is because of the trade war, but there are some other reasons like the competition between two countries on high technology issue, like cyber engineering, artificial intelligence, and 5G engineering, those issues and so on. So mutual trust probably is more important for both countries to restore for the future development. Because as we all know that mutual trust is the foundation of the bilateral relationship. And as I know, there are some, in China, there are some doubts that whether United States will continue to consider China as a partner in the future. And once that doubt comes true, I don't think that mutual trust can be very stable in the future. And the third issue for the bilateral relationship is a term called Thucydides trap. This is a term that was coined by the Graham Allison, a professor of Harvard University, to describe the competition between rising power and existing great powers almost always result in war. And China and American political scientists believe that China and US are in some way currently in this trap, because China is the rising great power, and the United States is existing great power. And there are some competitions between two powers. But how to escape from Thucydides trap is a long-term issue for China and the United States. Clearly, there was a war is not a choice for both sides, because it's going to be a disaster. And but how to improve mutual trust and decrease competition in bilateral relationship is the most important. It's the most difficult task for Washington and Beijing. So the next key interest of China is the relationship with Russia. And Russia plays a very special role in China's national security. So if we think about the map, in a map of East Asia, then Russia probably is the only great power that China is now facing directly. And also, Russia is the only neighbor. China has two neighbors from north. That's Mongolia and Russia. But Mongolia actually is receiving a lot of influence from Russia. So actually, Russia is the only neighbor, and it's also the biggest neighbor for China from north. So what China's main goal of foreign policy toward Russia is to make sure that Russia will keep its status as China's partner instead of rival. And also, you can see that Russia, in this way, Russia also play a very important role in China's national security. And the question that usually be asked is that whether Russia and China can become alliance, especially anti-Western alliance, or somebody may call it anti-American alliance in the future. And my answer is no. And there I have three following reasons. First of all, the foundation of China's foreign policy is still non-alignment. That means alliance treaty is not considered as an option in Beijing's policy-making process. Although there are some Chinese IR scholars like Yan Xuetong, who is the leading IR scholar in China, the professor from Peking University, argues for a long time that Beijing should give up its non-alignment foreign policy, as alliance will apparently increase Beijing's power in international affairs. But until now, he hasn't received any official response. So I believe that the non-alignment is still the official foreign policy of Beijing. So, and the second reason is core interest of Russia's foreign policy is to keep its great power status. Jeffrey Mankoff, a researcher from CSIS, called it great power politics. That means establishing alliance with China does not meet Russia's interest, as Moscow still wants to play as an independent power in world affairs, and many Russian scholars argue that alliance with China will weaken Russia's great power status. And the third reason is still about history. And that is the very last alliance between Moscow and Beijing, the Sino-Soviet alliance in 1950s. That alliance didn't end up very well. So, and also the end of such alliance had very negative impact on both China and serving throughout the Cold War period. And the shadow of the past has not faded yet, and many Chinese regard Russia as not a very reliable ally. And Russia and China, from my point of view, probably will continue the cooperation in many fields, even in the military field. That's for sure, but I don't think that alliance treaty will be established between two powers. The third key interest of China in Northeast Asia is to improve economic impact. For over 30 years, China paid a lot of attention to promote bilateral economic relationship with Japan, South Korea, ASEAN countries, and so on, in order to achieve this goal. However, since 2013, multilateral integration project has become the key method for Beijing. The significant idea is Belt and Road Initiative. As you can see on the map, is the orange line from the left map, and also called AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And the main economic zone of BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, is first is Silk Road Economic Belt, as you can see in the orange line on the map, and the 21st century maritime Silk Road, that's called the road. So that's why it's called Belt and Road. And the road is actually the light blue line that you can see on the map. And the main goal of this economic initiative is to promote economic relationship between China and Europe. And if the initiative comes true, it will significantly increase China's economic impact on Eurasia. And meanwhile, such an initiative can also help China to receive more energy supply from continental route and decrease energy dependence on maritime transportation, as many Chinese officials and scholars believe that maritime energy transportation is now not very reliable for Beijing because of the territory disputes on South China Sea, and also because of the military existence of United States on South China Sea. And now I'd like to talk about the challenge that China's foreign policy is currently facing in Northeast Asia. And I'll also list three of them, the most important three, I think. First is a nuclear issue of Korean Peninsula. And you're probably all familiar with this, as the Trump administration paid a lot of attention to this issue. And there are some progress for denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. For U.S., the biggest concern is the homeland security, because Washington regards North Korea's nuclear and missile program as an urgent threat to American territory. However, China is facing a more complicated situation. That is because China has sharing boundary with North Korea. And because of that, the bottom line of China's foreign policy toward North Korea is to make sure there is no war or huge chaos on Korean Peninsula, because a mass war or chaos will cause serious problems for China, like boundary security, refugee problem. Just think about the refugee problem, like from Syria to Europe. Even more serious problem will occur if war happens in North Korean Peninsula, because there is a direct sharing boundary between North Korea and China, and there will be more refugees coming from North Korea to China. And apparently, Beijing does not like North Korea's nuclear program. And for several years, since Xi Jinping took office, Beijing conducted very strict sanctions against North Korea, and this also caused the shrink of bilateral relations between Beijing and Pyongyang. And Kim Jong-un haven't visited China since 2018 until since 2012 when he took office until 2018. So there are 6 years that Kim Jong-un never visited China, and Xi Jinping never visited Pyongyang, which is very, very rare in the history of bilateral relationship between two countries. And Beijing is worried about whether DPRK can keep these nuclear facilities within safe conditions and avoid nuclear disasters. Because as you can see in the map, most of the North Korean's nuclear facility is near the boundary of China. That is because there are lots of mountains in this area, and it's very hard to inspect by satellite, especially satellites from the United States. But that causes another serious problem is that every time when North Korea has nuclear test, there is a small earthquake in Jilin province where I live. So we can feel the earthquake, real earthquake, caused because of the nuclear test from DPRK. So clearly, China does not like that, and regarded as a challenge Chinese national security. But because of China and North Korea have a sharing boundary, so China also conduct a very careful policy when it comes about North Korea. And in order to avoid any geopolitical disaster on Korean Peninsula. And I think that Beijing will still continue such cautious policy in the future toward North Korea and try its best to prevent any military operations against North Korea. And the next challenge for China's foreign policy in Northeast Asia is the rising competition with Japan. And this happens first in the economic field because Japan used to be the biggest economy in East Asia after World War II for over almost 50 years. And then China became the biggest one in 2010. And actually the GDP gap between China and Japan is actually growing in recent years. And besides, Tokyo is seeking for a stronger, more independent military power, which is also regarded as a potential threat for Beijing. And part of the reason is because of, and also part of the reason that why the competition is rising is also because of history. So Japan invaded China twice since the 19th century, and both were without huge significant impact on Chinese history. And another historical issue that still stays today is the territory dispute between China and Japan. That's especially in East China Sea, Diaoyu Island. Japanese call it Senkaku Island, but Chinese call it Diaoyu Island. And such territory dispute also decrease mutual trust between two countries, and can be a potential variable for growing competition between two countries. And the next challenge for China is the territory dispute among states in Northeast Asia. And such territory dispute exists almost in every bilateral relationship within the region. And here I marked several of them. And as I don't have a pen or something to show you, is that you can see from here, near the Taiwan, that's the East China Sea, that's where Chinese people call Diaoyu Island. That's the territory where the territory dispute occurs between China and Japan. And a little bit on the north, there's the between Japan and South Korea. That's the Lion Court Rocks, territory dispute between South Korea and Japan. And you probably know there was a trade war between Japan and South Korea recently. And part of the reason of this trade dispute is because of the long-term territory dispute. And another dispute is even between Japan and Russia. This is called South Korea Island. This island now is ruled by Russia. The Japanese government call it a Northern Territory because it's North Japan. And it used to be ruled by Russian Empire until Russo-Japanese War in 1905. And it became Japan's territory after the war, but the Soviet Union took it back after World War II. So the history of this territory dispute is pretty complicated. But until today, Russia and Japan have not yet signed a peace treaty after 70 years since World War II, which is very hard to imagine that the war is over been ended over 70 years, and the two main participants of this war, Soviet Union and now it's Russia and Japan, have not signed a peace treaty yet. And this actually, the territory dispute is the biggest obstacle for establishment of the treaty between Russia and Japan. And there are some small red circle you can also see. That's the Changbai Mountain of China. There's no official dispute between China and North Korea and South Korea, but some South Koreans and North Koreans believe that the Changbai Mountain should be part of Korean Peninsula. So there's in Northeast Asia, there are not only official territory dispute, but also potential territory dispute, which can have very negative impact on the regional cooperation. So as you can see, territory dispute exists almost in every bilateral relations in Northeast Asia. That has become the hardest roadblock for integration process, and in East Asia, and such territory dispute also decreased the mutual trust and made China's integration project more difficult to come true. And now I would like to conclude my presentation by providing a framework of China's foreign policy. So I have showed the interest and challenges of China's foreign policy in Northeast Asia, and this framework, I call it a pyramid framework for understanding China's future foreign policy. And as you can see, that the bottom of this, the most crucial pillar of this pyramid is the Sino-U.S. relations and Sino-Russian relations. That is because, as I said before, great power politics is still the foundation of China's strategic culture and China's foreign policy making. So the most important pillar for China's foreign policy is the relationship between among great powers. That means China's relations with United States and Russia is still the most important thing for China. And beyond that, the next level is China's relationship with regional powers. And in Northeast Asia, it's China's relationship with Japan, with two Koreas. And with the strong foundation of the relation between with great powers and regional powers, the next level for China's future foreign policy is China's regional integration projects. As I said, is BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and this only with strong and stable relationship with great powers and regional powers, China's regional integration projects can work very effectively. I mean, even without the strong relationship with great powers and regional powers, those integration projects may also work, but probably not as effective as Beijing expects. And the highest level is China's impact. So with the strong relations with great powers, regional powers, and the implementation of regional integration projects, and China tends to improve its impact on regional affairs. And only with the strong existence of lower three pillars, the China's impact can improve constantly. And this is the main content of my presentation. And again, I'm very grateful to be here and appreciate your support very much. I'm trying my best to demonstrate Chinese perspective on China's role and international issues. But as I said before, apparently there are some different arguments even within China. And of course, I'm looking forward to your questions, and I'll try my best to answer them. Thank you so much.
All right, so please pass your question cards to our volunteers. In a moment, we'll begin the Q&A period. Can you please tell us more about the support China provides to North Korea, the scale of the support and the forms it takes?
Well, it's probably true that China supports Korea a lot before Xi Jinping took office, but apparently that Xi Jinping has very different outlook compared to the previous president of China, and China actually conducted very strict sanction against North Korea. But after the summit between Trump and Kim Jong-un, both China and North Korea changed their foreign policy a little bit. And China now is considered China used to consider North Korea as a threat, as a total threat, but now with the decline of the relationship between China and the United States, now of course North Korea's geopolitical value for Beijing is actually improved a little bit. But still, as I said before, North Korea's nuclear program is still, if you ask any Chinese scholars and officials, I guess most of them, the answer is still the threaten to Chinese national security. So I guess the support from China to North Korea will be still very, very limited in near future. And another reason is because the relationship between North Korea and the United States, even after the summit, is not very stable. Apparently, the negotiation between North Korea and the United States after the summit in Vietnam between Trump and Kim Jong-un, the negotiations process is not very good. And China's attitude now is wait and see, to see what will happen in this year and what will happen in the next election in the United States. So I don't think there will be like a huge change concerning support from China to North Korea. I think China's policy now is still wait and see to see whether the negotiation between Pyongyang and Washington can go on and what kind of result will be in the next election in the United States. Thank you.
So a related question, what does China see as a viable resolution of existing UN sanctions on North Korea over its violations of the Non-Proliferation Treaty?
Wow, it's so many questions about North Korea. But I think that actually is the very hot topic right now in Northeast Asia. And I'm not very aware of what kind of sanction is now going on between China and North Korea as not economist, but the sanction from China to North Korea was actually pretty strict. One instance as I can take is we used to visit several companies of our province which used to have cooperation with North Korea. And those companies, the businessmen, those managers, what they told us that in recent years it's almost impossible to send a needle for injection to North Korea because the metal material is forbidden according to the UN sanctions. So even the small needle for injection for medical use is impossible to transport from China to North Korea. So I guess the sanction will still go on, especially United States will not release any will continue with sanction against North Korea. So I don't think China has a lot of have a lot of freedom to release the sanction. So I think the sanction will still go on. And I used to visit North Korea once, and what I can say is that those sanctions did impact on North Korea's economy strongly. And you can see that economic development in North Korea is not very good. And whether such situation can continue, well, I don't know. But I think next year we can see whether the negotiation will go on and how China regards North Korea. And I think in most circumstances, the sanction will still go on from China's side. Thank you.
So a big issue between the United States and China seems to be that of intellectual property. Can you suggest a way to get past the current difficulties that would benefit both countries?
That means the
intellectual property, so copyrights.
Okay, I see. Yeah. Actually, it's one of the most important issue of the trade war between United States and China. And I think this issue still exists, and it probably will continue to exist because even in China, for Chinese economy, although it's not like the totally free market economy like United States, but Chinese government, Beijing, cannot control everything in economy. So I do believe the copyright issue in China now is developing, and now Beijing have more serious consideration and attitude toward copyright issue. And especially it's the issue of trade war, that's no doubt. But I'm not sure whether Beijing have enough power to control everything in the economy. And probably some of this issue will still continue. And this probably will be the long-term issue for Sino-U.S. relationship. And I hope the negotiation between Washington and Beijing can deal with it, but I'm not sure because from my point of view, such problem will still continue.
Probably you're aware that a few days ago, Chinese documents became public that described conditions and China's policy toward the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Did you know that?
Not very clearly, but
yeah. So the documents that became public describe the way that the Chinese have been handling the internment camps for Uyghurs in that province, and so the question is, what will be the effect in China of this recent release of information about the policy, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. For most Chinese people, as far as I know, they regarded Xinjiang issue as a terrorism issue. So it's different from what United States consider is part of human rights, but for most Chinese people, it's about terrorism. So I think, as far as I know, most people support such policy, and whether such policy is will become the bigger issue between China and the United States, and whether such policy will continue for the next few years, I think China have a very strong policy against terrorism. That's for sure, because several terrorist attacks happened in Chinese territory for recent years. So Beijing's attitude is still very strong in terms of terrorism. But I think this policy will still continue. But whether it will become a more serious issue between United States and China, we'll see. Thank you.
Okay, so we have, for a final question, you're asked to discuss China's role and policy in the South China Sea, and I guess in particular, if you can help us understand why China is so adamant about strengthening its control over the waters in that sea.
It's also part of the Chinese. It's also about the Chinese strategic culture. As I said before, Chinese people pay a lot of attention to history, and the history from 19th century and beginning of 20th century is about how China is a history about China, how losing the authority on those territories. So for now, Chinese people and Chinese culture, especially nowadays, is very sensitive to territory issue. So I'm not sure whether I remember correctly, but I think there was a research about China's response to external affairs, and research showed that China's attitude becomes stronger when it comes to the territory issue. So I mean the territory, why China have strong policy on territory issue is because part of it is because of the history, and another reason is because the China's rising power, and now China has more power to control this territory, to conduct its policy towards this territory. That's why China will have such policy on this water issue. Thank you.
All right, we'll conclude our program now, and let's once again thank Dr. Xu Bo for his wonderful presentation. Thanks once more to our sponsors, the University of Iowa's Honors Program, the U of I Public Policy Center, the Stanley U of I Foundation Support Organization for generous and ongoing financial support. Thanks also to today's special sponsors, Joyce Carmen Baldus and Conrad Schultz. And thank you, City Channel 4, for making our programs available to viewing audiences. So, Bo, as a small token of our appreciation, it's my pleasure to present you with the coveted Iowa City Foreign Relations Council mug.
Thank you.
So here you
Thanks.
are.
Thanks.